Welcome to EKS&H Consulting's online workshop on taking TM1 documentation to the next level with QUBEdocs. My name is Shannon Beasley. I am the Training Manager at EKS&H Consulting, and I will be your host for today's workshop. During today's workshop, all attendees will be on mute. We invite you to use the chat question feature on the upper right-hand side of your screen to submit questions during the workshop. We encourage you to submit questions as they come to you throughout today's presentation, and we will answer your question at the end. You may need to click the orange button to expand the GoToWebinar control panel to use the questions feature. In today's workshop, we'll cover a demonstration of dynamic TM1 model documentation using QUBEdocs and a demonstration of version control. We wrap up today's workshop with a question and answer session. Before I turn things over to our presenter, I'd like to introduce Zach Snively, Account Executive at EKS&H Consulting. Zach?
Thank you very much, Shannon, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to join us today. My name is Zach Snively, and as Shannon said, I'm an Account Executive here with EKS&H. I'd like to start off by taking a few moments to tell you a little bit more about us here at EKS&H. I know many of you have worked with us in the past, and some of you might know us as InfoLink Consulting. Over the previous year, we have joined with EKS&H. It's been a very exciting year for us here, and we're really excited to be part of the team and part of the family here. This has been a great opportunity for all of us, and it's a really good opportunity for our clients as well to reap some of the benefits of being part of a firm like EKS&H. As many of you know, we are an IBM Premier Business Partner, and we focus on the IBM Business Analytics stack, which includes IBM Cognos Business Intelligence, Cognos TM1, and also SPSS, which is IBM's predictive analytics tool. We're also very excited to announce our partnership with QUBEdocs, and we're going to get into them here in just a few moments. We're also very excited to announce that we're now a Tableau business partner, and Tableau is a visualization and business analytics tool. And we're an Informatica business partner as well. Some of the services that we provide to our clients include consulting, which means that we can help provide services on all of the technologies that I've previously listed. We provide training, and Shannon heads up our training department. We can help train you on most of the solutions that I've mentioned as well. Our solution expertise extends to our consultants, and they're being able to implement and help you out with all the tools that I've mentioned. And our industry focus, that means that when we come out and we work with you folks, we're going to be up to date on what's going on in your industry and be able to provide relevant and good recommendations to you while we're working with you. So before we get into the actual presentation, I wanted to take a moment and explain why we seeked out and found and joined in a partnership with a company like QUBEdocs. So before, when we'd come out and we'd implement TM1, we'd come out and we'd build out your solution and to your specifications, and we'd install the solution and finish the implementation. And then the last step before our consultants left and we turned the keys over to you would be documenting your cubes and documenting your models there within your TM1 environment. And this would take, at times, 2 to 3 weeks to complete the documentation, and at that point, we'd hand over your documentation to you, and then we'd walk out the door. At that point, at that very moment, your documentation would be completely up to date and ready to go. And then as soon as you got your hands on the system and people started working with TM1 and changing models, things would start to change in the actual TM1 cubes. And then we found that many of our customers wouldn't actually update their documentation. So the documentation would tend to become stale as things changed within your models. So at that point, we decided it was going to be a good decision to go out and find a company like QUBEdocs who actually had a really exciting, really great documentation tool. And the reason that this changes the game so much is it, on an initial implementation, and QUBEdocs is a solution that we're going to recommend to every single one of our customers moving forward on new implementations, and obviously we're suggesting that those of you on the line here today take a look at it as well. But on a brand new implementation, QUBEdocs can reduce the cycle time to complete documentation from several weeks down to just a couple of days. And some of the reasons that this is helpful is that, for example, if you've changed your documentation and someone new comes on board, having up-to-date documentation is really going to speed up their onboarding. Or it can also protect your organization if your documentation is out of date and you lose someone important that has some knowledge of your environment. That knowledge can walk right out the door and you could be stuck having to redo the documentation yourself. So QUBEdocs is a really exciting technology, and we're really happy to be partnered with this company. So at this point, I don't want to spend any more of your time looking at PowerPoint slides. I want to go ahead and hand things over to Earl Drake. He's a senior consultant here with EKS&H, and he's probably worked with some of you in the past as well, so some of you may know him. And Earl, with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Zach. So before we get into the demo, I just want to take a little bit more time to talk specifically about QUBEdocs itself and what it is. It is a third-party tool that's been brought into play, and it allows you to actually dynamically document your models, allows you to keep them up to date and everything else. You can document them using your own terms and internal language that may make more sense to you guys than what a consultant speak might mean. It'll allow you to better understand the model on your own terms. It gives you a good chance to really visualize the relationships and dependencies between TM1 objects. There's a great flow charting tool within QUBEdocs itself that automatically gets generated and allows you to see how things are actually tied together. And then the last major point that it actually will help with is it actually enables you to review model changes, keeps things ready for you by actually snapshotting the model when you're doing that generation of the documentation, and then you can compare those snapshots as you go back and forth looking at different versions or across different environments. So I'm going to go ahead and start the demo here in a second, and we're going to just kind of walk through taking a look at what QUBEdocs actually looks like when it's integrated with a very simple model. In that simple model, I will do a little bit of update of the documentation and show how it dynamically changes so that you can see that it's really essentially live and will stay updated for you as you go forward. I'm going to also pull up a much more complex TM1 model, and in that model I've actually already intentionally put a few errors in places so that we'll be able to see how QUBEdocs actually works as far as generating some code validation and then doing some error checking. And then the last thing that I want to show is how it can actually simplify your migrations across your environments. With that, I'll go ahead and get into the demo itself. And so you can see here on my screen I've got both TM1 Architect up here on the right as well as a little place for where QUBEdocs is actually built. And so I've got the software itself running separately from TM1. So you can see here within TM1 there's just a few cubes in this very simple model that we're going to take a look at. I'll also show you real quick, I'm going to take a look later on at a much more complex model with all sorts of different cubes in it so that we can show you how this actually works both with a simple and a complex model itself. So the first thing I want to actually do is just walk through what some of the documentation looks like. It's all web-based, so any user could come in and take a look at the documentation itself. It's got just a basic landing page here for your particular model, and some of the highlights of what the tool itself will automatically generate for us is it will go through and show all of the different cubes we have, the dimensions, the processes that are in place, basic configuration of the model itself, and then some of the real neat things that actually automatically get generated are the flow chart. And you can see, as I mentioned, this is a very simple model. Right here, the flow chart isn't too complex. Some data is moving between some of the cubes pretty simply, and then some data moving within a cube itself. So very simple model for us to take a look at, and we have all of this data flow and the flow charting going across. Another great feature that QUBEdocs provides for us is for all of our different cubes and our dimensions, it shows how they are integrated. So I've got a matrix here that the tool has generated for me automatically. Down the left side here I have all of the different dimensions, and across the top here I have all of the different cubes, and it's just providing a very basic matrix. And one of the huge advantages of this is that I can go into this matrix, take a look, and I will know as a developer if I'm going to go make some updates to a certain dimension, what cubes does that impact? So that's some of the huge benefits, and this will all automatically get generated as we go back and redo the documentation. So from a very simplistic standpoint, then, we also have each one of the major types of objects, cubes, dimensions, and processes documented out. So if I go to the cubes here for the model, I can see that I've got my list of 7 cubes right here, and there's basic description for each one of these cubes. I've entered all of this information within TM1, and it's all come through to the documentation itself. So it gives me a very high-level view of what's getting done within each one of these cubes, and then I can even, everything is clickable, so I can go to this budget plan cube. Again, it gives me this basic description of what's going on. I have all of my different dimensions in play, so I know what's being used for that cube. And then, just as it does for the overall model documentation, I can actually see the data flow for that particular cube, which is great. I can now see all of the data going in and out of the cube and everything else, whether it's through rules or through processes or however that data is getting updated. So that's a huge advantage right here. I can go to any one of my cubes and see all of that getting done there. I can see what processes are in the model that actually affect the cube, and this actually is affecting either inbound data into the cube or outbound data from the cube. So it can show any way that this cube is being touched. The last thing regarding cube documentation, which is a real neat feature within the tool itself, is some nice formatting for the actual rules themselves. So I've gone in and I've just set up some particular comments within the cube rules themselves, and I now have, for all of the different rules within my cube, I've got a basic description or name of the rule itself, what the rule is doing, and who last updated that data and when. So you can see that I've got multiple different rules built out where now I'm converting to local or I convert to the currency all the way through my cube. So it really provides some nice documentation there where I can actually expand and see what's actually being done and turn this into something that makes a lot more sense to me from my own personal perspective. Similarly, we can go through and see how dimensions are getting documented. Again, we have a list of all of the dimensions in the cube, in the model, descriptions of each one of them, and in the case of dimensions, we even actually have flags over here as to whether something's getting updated manually or if it's getting updated via Turbo Integrator process. So I'll take a look at the business unit dimension here to begin with. And so I've got just basic description up here, just talking about what it is. It shows what cubes that dimension's being used in. If this dimension was getting updated via processes or anything, I would again see that whole layout showing all of that update. And then another nice thing that you're able to take a look at is the actual attributes that are associated with the business, with any dimension in this business unit dimension. So we have multiple attributes in here. You can see that I've got one for the business unit that actually shows the actual descriptive name of the business unit. The coding itself is actually what shows up as a business unit, but this way I actually know that I've got the descriptive name. In this case, where our business unit goes across multiple different currencies, so I can have a default currency for the business unit identified for calculations. And then the last particular attribute that we've built here for business units is actually the name of the manager responsible. And I've even gone in here and made a comment that now we can build out security flowing immediately just based on updating that manager so that all that's taken care of. So all of this stuff is just descriptions that I built in particular for this dimension. The last TM1 object that can be documented, and you'll notice that There's very little documentation in here right now, but I've got all my different processes that I can build in. I've got descriptions for each one of them, and for my processes I've got a data source type and where that data source actually is. So you can see in the case of either files or ODBC connections, it's pointing out to those particular sources, but in the case of a data source view, so it's going against another cube or the same cube, it's just showing some basic information there. So if I click on this mover process, you now see that it's got data flowing back and forth and describes what the process is doing. But you'll notice that we've got data flow in here, everything else, but I don't really have any information for what my view is updating or what my view is that's actually being used in this model. So I want to go grab some more information, put that into the documentation, and actually show how that dynamically changes. So I'm now going to go back to TM1 and go update information in a couple of different places. First of all, I'm going to go into the applications, into the QUBEdocs object documentation, and I'm going to go down to that same mover process, and I'm going to change this documentation so it's showing that I'm just moving data from 2014 to 2013. So I've just updated that real quick there within TM1. I'm going to close this out. And then within the actual process itself, the mover process, I'm going to come over to my advanced tag, and I'm just going to add in some descriptive information with a specific hashtag code that QUBEdocs provides for us called data source comment. And this is just going to take the budget plan cube, start with the 2014 budget version, and all 2014 months. So I've just made a real quick comment there, saved that. And so then the last thing that I need to do within TM1 is actually run this QUBEdocs update process. So I'll just click on that run button. So now everything has been updated within TM1. Come back to QUBEdocs, generate my documentation again. And after just a couple quick seconds here, now I can relaunch that documentation in the browser. So I'm again looking at that exact same model with all those same cubes, with all the same dimensions, with all the processes. You can see now that I've updated the description for this mover process. And then when I go click on that, you can see that I now have a comment in here talking about what the data source is. So I can go in and completely document, in the case of processes, where the data is coming from, what's getting done within each one of the segments, whether it's the prologue, the metadata, the data, anything like that. And this will allow me to actually keep everything up to date as we make changes. So real quick changes. Obviously, since you're making all the updates within TM1, you could always just set up a chore that would do like an overnight process to update this documentation for you. So that's what a very simple model looks like. I mentioned that we were going to look also at a more complex model. So I'm going to go over to that more complex model and go ahead and start generating its documentation. So one of the huge pluses that this tool has, in addition to right now it's going through the process of doing all the documentation of the rules and the rules for the cubes and the dimensions and the processes, and it's starting to build out all that basic data flow for us and everything else. And you can also see, as I mentioned, that this particular model here that we're looking at now is this model here that has a whole large number of cubes for us. So, but one of the other things that it's actually also doing is each one of those processes, it's going through and essentially running each one as a test just to make sure that that process actually works correctly and everything else. One of the challenges within TM1 itself is you can build out a process, and if you've actually just inadvertently done a typo or something like that in a cube name or anything else, you may not know about it when you're first updating that process. So one of the nice things that this actually allows me to do now is I've got now error messages after the generation of this particular model, and so it says just here, review the error logs. So I can come up to the logs, open up the error log itself, and I see a whole list of different errors. In this case, the very first one that's highlighted is talking about a process that is referring to a cube average wages, but that cube doesn't actually exist in the model. Basically, what probably happened was we were building that cube out and or building the process out and had that cube in place, and then maybe we rebuild it in a different manner or something and didn't realize that we needed to update this process as well. So this actually allows us to essentially test the entire model, make sure everything's in place, and give us all of these errors or warnings if there is something out there that we need to go check. So now I could go through and check all of these different errors to see if anything is amiss or if it's just something that I just need to delete or anything like that. So as I mentioned, this is a much more complex model, so I'm going to go ahead and launch that documentation. As opposed to that 7-cube model that we were looking at, you can see now that my entire model here has 57 cubes, 312 processes. So that's a huge model right now, probably bigger than most any of you have in place, or certainly near the top of that. And you can see that that documentation itself was still pretty fast in coming up for us. This is when some of the things like this process flow and everything else really come into play when we've got a great big model like this. You can now start seeing where all of my different cubes have arrows going all over the place, data flowing from one cube to the next or internally or anything like that. And so this is just a huge advantage to be able to immediately document this. Something like this would probably take 2 to 3 days just to manually create the first time, and then any updates that would be needed would certainly be a challenge from that standpoint. This way, that process just rebuilt that entire documentation in, basically 45 seconds or a minute, something like that. So that's what it looks like on both a basic model and a large model. The one last thing I want to show is the comparison between different models. And so this would be a real advantage for a situation where if you've got multiple environments and you want to move your data from development to production or anything like that. And so there's a tool within QUBEdocs itself where I can just come in and do what's called a compare versions. And I can go grab my 2 different models. So I've got my planning sample base, and then I've got the planning sample that I've been working on and updating. Now I go and click on Generate to generate this documentation. And again, now what it's doing is it's going through comparing the 2 models, comparing the documentation, everything else to see what's changed between the 2. And then if I click Launch Documentation, I now see that my model changes between the 2 cubes. I can see over here on the left that I've got 6 cubes that are different, 24 dimensions, 4 processes. So I can see an entire summary here on the top. I've got 2 new cubes, 4 modified cubes, 24 modified dimensions, and each one of these is again clickable. So I can now go to this cube. I can see what cubes have been added. Those 2 cubes have been added. I can see what's been modified. and I can even go down to the particular updates. So I can see that I've changed the descriptions, I've changed rules, I've added in additional rule information for this cube. So this allows me then to take and parse out what needs to be migrated across from one environment to another without having to mentally keep track or some sort of major overall checklist or anything like that. This tool will actually provide me that quick list for what do I need to look at in order to be able to migrate things across and have my updated model over in my production environment. So those are some of the quick hits from the QUBEdocs tool itself from a demo standpoint. So, I've shown a few of the benefits of QUBEdocs itself, being able to dynamically document your models and have those updates go along. One of the real big advantages right here for dynamic documentation is, if you're getting ready to prep for your next budget cycle, you could come in and get those quick updates completed right away so that everybody could see them, see how things have changed from one year to the next. It will quickly reduce your documentation time, especially if you're trying to build out some of those process flows or anything like that. Again, you can see the relationships immediately with those flow charts, and then, as I mentioned, being able to track of model changes both internally and across environments.
Earl, this is Zach Snively. Thanks very much for that demo. That was great. I think that was really useful, and if I knew a little bit more about TM1, I think I would have really been able to use that information. So, Shannon, if we have the questions available, I think we had several coming in here during that demonstration. We can go ahead and work through those.
Yes, Zach, so we do invite everyone to use the chat question feature on the upper right-hand side of the screen to continue to submit questions. And you may need to click the orange arrow button to expand the GoToWebinar control panel to use the questions feature. So our first question is, how much can it do if you don't keep up with the tagging? And that's from Vivian Pemberton.
How much? Okay, so if you don't keep up, Vivian, if you don't keep up on the tagging itself, it will still do all of that basic the flow charting, and it will keep track of that entire matrix and everything else that was on that summary tag, and then also the basic descriptions of all of the different dimensions, cubes, everything else. The tagging itself really would just provide additional information both within the rules and within the processes of what's going on and how things are moving around within those.
Thanks, Earl. Another question that we have is, what do you need to do in TM1 to be sure it is ready for QUBEdocs?
That's one of the beautiful things about this tool itself is it actually just goes in and it will attach to any one of your TM1 environments just through an auto installer. I've gone in and set that installation up on multiple different environments, and every time I've done it so far, it's immediately been in there and updated, and everything has run smoothly within TM1.
Another question that we received is, what TM1 role allows access to QUBEdocs?
So there's several different ways of looking at that. From the actual documentation that we saw out on the web, that's something that anybody can get to if they have the proper URL. It's not restricted or anything, but then again, it's really just help information. Nobody can go and update any of that or do anything there. Similarly, the QUBEdocs tool itself, what you would normally do is just install that on the desktop of the power users or the admins or anything so that they could generate the documentation itself. But then as far as the actual tagging and the actual documentation and everything else, that's done within TM1, and any, however that particular customer wants to set up the documentation, typically you would set it up so that just the administrators would have access to it, but you could set it up any way you wanted to.
Earl, one of the questions we had is someone says that they hadn't heard much about this before and wondered how long QUBEdocs had actually been available.
So QUBEdocs has been around for about 2 years now, but it's another IBM partner just like we are who created the tool itself. They are based in New Zealand, so they've not really been pushing to make too much of a presence into North America until relatively recently, probably 6 to 7 months ago at the most.
New Zealand, that's interesting. So we had another question from someone who actually was unable to join at the very beginning of the demo, and she just would like to know, is QUBEdocs available to those using TM1? Or is it a separate purchase? And I think you touched on that a little bit, so maybe you could repeat that. And if so, what is the pricing model for QUBEdocs?
Sure. It's definitely a third-party tool, so it would be another, it's another company that we are doing a partnership with. And as far as the pricing itself, I'll let Zach cover that for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Earl. I'll go ahead and talk a little bit more about the pricing. The great thing about QUBEdocs, or another great thing about QUBEdocs, is the simplicity of the licensing model that they use. Really good model, and there's a couple things I'll talk through here first. And the first one's going to be for TM1 enterprise customers. So there's two components, and to really provide an accurate quote on this software, I'd have to ask someone a couple of questions, and my information will be here at the end, so anyone that wants an exact dollar amount, please feel free to reach out to me. But the first component to pricing QUBEdocs is the number of TM1 server instances that you have there in your TM1 environment. And the second thing in IBM speak is the number of PVUs, or processor value units, that you have. And combined, once we ask a couple of questions around those, I'd be able to determine a good QUBEdocs price for the TM1 enterprise model. And for Cognos Express users, the model's even simpler than that. It's just priced based on the number of environments that you have within Cognos Express. So pretty straightforward pricing model, and anyone please feel free to send me an email or give me a quick phone call, and I'd be happy to discuss with you further. So Shannon, I think if that's it with the questions, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out, and Shannon, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thanks, Zach. Those were our final questions. I'd like to thank Earl Drake for presenting on QUBEdocs for us today. And thanks to all of you for attending. We hope you found this workshop a good value of your time.